千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Laozi. Here we are once again, everybody. I want to invite everyone to center yourself, to gain that Tao state of mind in participation for this process, where your energy together with everybody else will make this a special occasion. So chapter 56, as I mentioned, one of my personal favorites, it is all about the practice of the Tao, the path of the Tao, the traversal, the journey on the path. So let me share with you the Chinese chapter title. This is, again, information that is not widely available. Most translations out there will not mention that these chapters even have chapter titles. They just give the number. Like for this one, they'll just say chapter 56. But the original Chinese title, there are two. The primary title is, so again, 3 characters as usual. Daodejing. The first character to the left, that's the character for the Tao. The second character means value or honor. And then the third character is chapter. Therefore, the name for this chapter is the Tao honored or the Tao valued. This comes from the end of this chapter, and the last statement, the last line of this chapter talks about how those who possess the Tao, which in this chapter is also called Mystic Oneness, those who possess the Tao or Mystic Oneness become greatly honored and valued in the world. They're valued and honored for their wisdom. So what about the alternative name? Some of these chapters have 2 names. And so you'll see in parentheses, the alternative name, 真行章. The first character there means true, authentic, genuine. The second character in the middle, that means to do or to travel, to walk. Sort of like when we say you have to not just talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk. So to walk the walk, in our expression, is to actually put into practice what you preach. Same thing here. So this is about the genuine practice of the Tao, the true practice of the Tao. Let me explain why this is so significant. So people aren't always realizing that Daodejing itself is divided into 2 books. Book 1 is Daodejing, the book of the Tao. It goes from chapter 1 to chapter 37. So when the focus is on the Tao, it's all about true understanding of the Tao. True understanding, 真知. And therefore, 道贵真知. The Tao is greatly valued, greatly honored, and you attain a true understanding of it. That is the focus of the first half. The second half, Daodejing, the classic of virtues, the second half goes from chapter 38 to chapter 81, the very last chapter, and the focus is on the path of virtues, cultivation, true practice of the Tao. And when I say true practice of the Tao, I'm specifically referring to actions that you take that are true to Tao principles. To place yourself truly on the path. You are truly being on the path. So 真行, the true travel, the true journey on the path is exactly what makes the Tao so highly honored, highly valued. And the important thing here is the realization that it isn't enough just to have one half of it. It's not enough just to understand what the Tao is all about. That's the first half. The second half is that you must walk the path. It all goes back to that. At the end of the day, the important thing is what you do. Are you able to apply these principles that you profess to know? If so, then you are exactly what Lao Tzu has in mind when he wrote these chapters. So let's take a look at the chapter itself. We should, as usual, analyze the chapter. We should talk about the different sections before we divide it up into a line-by-line analysis. So first, the very first thing that I'd like to do is just to read through the chapter from beginning to end. Daodejing, chapter 56. Those who know do not talk. Those who talk do not know. Close the mouth, shut the doors, blunt the sharpness, unravel the knots, dim the glare, mix the dust. This is called Mystic Oneness. They cannot obtain this and be closer. They cannot obtain this and be distant. They cannot obtain this and be benefited. They cannot obtain this and be harmed. They cannot obtain this and be valued. They cannot obtain this and be degraded. Therefore, they become honored by the world. So a couple of things to note before we get into all the details. In the second part of it, the reference to they, I want to make sure everyone knows that they is implied. It is not represented by a specific character in the original Chinese. It's referencing back to the first two lines. Those who know do not walk. Those who know do not talk. Those who talk do not know. Specifically, it's referencing the 知者, the first two characters, those who know, which, as I will explain, is also those who possess wisdom, those who are wise. So they are described from line 10 all the way down to the end of the chapter, line 16. Their various attributes and interactions and characteristics. Then I also want to, one more thing to point out. We're going to talk about all of these lines one by one, and we will establish a great deal of clarity on exactly what they mean. One more thing that I'll do is to point out that if you look at the last character of line 14, it's exactly the same as the last character of line 16. However, there's a difference in the way that they're translated. The context of 14 makes the translation valued. The context of 16 makes it honored. And I will explain exactly what that difference means, why it is significant when we get to the end of this chapter. For now, though, we should be focusing on the different sections, see if we can divide it up. So the first two lines, those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know. We certainly see the repeating characters from line 1 to line 2. And they can be translated simply. The second of the two repeating characters means no or not. It's a negation character. Therefore, it is translated as do not. The first of the two characters that repeats is he who, they who, those who, that which, and so on. And the way that you translate it would depend on the context. Here, it's talking just like the previous chapters. This chapter starts out talking about those who will accumulate virtues, those who cultivate the Tao. So those are the people, those are the wise people. They know, and therefore they do not talk. So it's pretty clear that we can have a mini section that includes only the first two lines. Then we have a lot more character repetitions from line 3 on. We can see that the repetitions continue until line 8. The middle character is the same. That middle character is a pronoun. It can be translated as its, its, no apostrophe, as their, as in something belonging to them. Here, in order to keep the original brevity and the original flexibility to apply to different contexts, the translation is best served by the, as you can see. Now, at the end of these 6 lines, from 3 to 8, line 9 says, well, this is called Mystic Oneness. So this is actually the concluding line for the section. It means we need to include it as part of the section, so it looks like this. It's repeating 6 different descriptions, and then at the very end, in the 7th line of this section, it says, well, all of the above, the 6 lines above, that's called Mystic Oneness. It means attainment of Tao cultivation. It means the accumulation of virtues. So what about the section below? Once again, we're seeing many repeating characters. This is probably one of the chapters in the Daodejing that contains the most repeating characters. Take a look. We've got 6 lines again that have a lot of repeating characters. The first character in line 10 would be thus, therefore, and it can also be skipped if the context is clear. Then we have 4 characters that are repeated again and again, and you can see the translation on the right-hand side. They cannot obtain this and be, etc. This is a reference to Mystic Oneness. They will be an implied reference of those who know, and that those who do not talk, those who cultivate the Tao. Then we have a similar situation as the section right above this. We have 1 line that serves as a concluding line to the section. They become honored by the world. So we'll talk more about that. So as you can probably tell already, there is a lot for us to dig into. There's a lot of food for thought, a lot of discussions, a lot of explanation that we should be getting into. Starting with the first 2 lines, those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know. Here, it is particularly important for me to focus on the first 2 characters. So in Mandarin, 知者, literally those who know. That's one way to understand it. Another interpretation, equally valid, is 智者. So English speakers may not be able to tell the difference between the two. The first context is 知者. The second one is 智者. The pitch in the first character is different. When you pronounce it like 智者, 知, the character for know, is synonymous with 智 for wisdom. Therefore, 智者 would simply mean a wise person, a person who who has wisdom, like a sage, for instance. And this can also mean someone who is proficient in a particular art, meaning an expert, someone who knows all about that art. And an expert, if the expert is authentic and genuine, truly possesses expertise, then there is a commonality across all different disciplines where we find experts. The true experts in that discipline have the same similar characteristic to one another, in that they don't talk all that much. They spend their time getting it done because they can do it. They don't talk about it, they just do it. So then the opposite is that conversely, we know this, we see this in real life. There are many people out there who talk a lot, but can't necessarily deliver. You probably can think of a few people like that right now as we're talking about it. So in the West, because we're talking about a common feature of humanity, this is something that is common in the West. It is not something that is unique to Eastern thought or Eastern culture. You and I know the common expression, doers don't talk, talkers don't do, right? So this is very telling how ingrained this is in human nature. It is very easy to find people that talk way too much. So I want to provide some examples on the commonality of this, on how we can oftentimes find people who talk way too much. So I want to present sort of the signs to watch out for. Like, for instance, those who claim to be highly intelligent, those who claim to be highly accomplished. Those who are truly intelligent and accomplished, chances are other people, not them, but everybody else around them is already telling you that, and they themselves don't talk about themselves all that much. There's nothing to say. It's all coming in from other people. So that's one example. Now, there's more. Because of the commonality of this type of person, there are other signs that we can be watching out for. For instance, someone who expounds on many theories, who tells you about the pros and cons, the evidence, supporting evidence for this and that. This is essentially to show off knowledge. It's basically saying to everyone, look at how much I know. I can tell you all these theories about what's going on. And don't make the mistake of asking which theory is correct, because then this person will launch into a discussion on how the theories compare to one another. Another example, someone who issues dire warnings. Now, there are times when we actually do need to be warned about certain things, dangers, but there are also people, the kind of the person I'm talking about, that just go around talking about how the world is coming to an end. What we would call sort of the Chicken Little mentality. The sky is falling. So warning after warning after warning, also showing off, hey, everybody, look at how much insights I have. Look how much foresight I have. I know more than other people. I know the bad things that are coming, and let me tell you all about it. That's also talking way too much. A Tao cultivator, rather than to issue warnings all around, would be taking action to ensure the safety of people, rather than to engage in endless warnings. So there's more. There's also what I call the concern troll. Someone who points out problems. Hey, I want to give you some advice. You can improve. And this is to project a helpful image. There are people who are genuinely trying to help, and then there are people who are trying to make themselves look better by offering to help others because, hey, look at all this knowledge, all this wisdom that I'm teaching you. It's actually more of a distraction when they get into that mode to tell you all about the things that you're doing wrong and how they can fix it for you or how you can fix it for yourself. I also find that occasionally I find people who talk about many plans. You know, I'm planning to do this. I've got great plans for that. Got big plans for the future. Well, they talk more about the plans than the actual implementation of the plans. That's a warning sign for sure. So then lastly, I also want to be careful of the people who complain endlessly about everything. Complaining seems like the great global pastime of human beings everywhere. We all complain from time to time, and some of us complain a lot. Seems like there's no end. It's a bottomless pit. So watch out for that. Yet another sign of people who talk way too much. So what Lao Tzu is trying to say, as you can see from these examples, he's saying that he's not saying we should be completely silent. You know, he's not advocating a vow of silence. So what does he actually mean? I'd like to dig into that when I come back. We are in the midpoint of our meeting today. I would like to park our presentation on this slide. When we come back, we'll talk about what Lao Tzu actually meant. He's not talking about complete silence. So what does he want? Okay, so as I said, Lao Tzu is not saying that we should not speak at all. He's not advocating a vow of silence. What Lao Tzu is saying is that in real life, what happens is that the actual experts, the people who know, tend to talk less. And when they do speak, they choose the appropriate moment for maximum effectiveness. To illustrate this point, there is a story that I would like to share with you. And so the slide title is Talk More or Talk Less. And this goes back to about 2,400 years ago in ancient China. There was a student who was hard at work studying the Tao teachings in regards to being quiet and speaking up. So what he was thinking was that, well, there should be the appropriate time for either. Were there any exceptions? And what he wanted to know was, could there be a time when it is actually a good thing to speak a lot? So this question being on his mind, you know, he wanted to find out about whether or not the teaching was absolute, if there were exceptions. So he went to his teacher. His teacher was Mozi, who was one of the many Tao sages who expanded upon Tao philosophy at the time of the Warring States, Mozi. So the student asked, Master, can there be any advantages in speaking a lot? Are there situations where that can be advantageous? Mozi, the sage, replied. He said, I'll explain it to you this way. Think about it this way. Consider the frogs in the pond. they croak constantly. At night, they continue croaking all night long. It seems like they never stop croaking. So tell me, who listens to the frogs? The student thought about this, and he thought, well, the answer is obvious. He said, Master, no one listens to the frogs. So Mozi nodded at this and said, well, that's right. The talkative people of the world are just like the frogs in a pond. They can croak all day long, all night long. They can croak until they are exhausted. And still, no one will pay a lot of attention to them. Then he said, on the other hand, think about the rooster. Think about how the rooster in the morning, how he comes out to greet the sunrise, how the rooster crows so loudly with his morning call. Now tell me, who listens to him? Now the student understood where the master was going with this. He said, everyone, master, all of us, we all get up in the morning when we hear the call of the rooster. So Mozi said, now you can see the difference. Talking too much all the time produces little to no effect, like the frogs. But if you sound off at the right time with exactly what is needed and no more, now that will be effective and advantageous to answer your question directly. So in life, we should find the right moment to say the right things rather than to talk meaningless drivel all the time. Be the rooster, not the frog. So that is the story about the frogs and the rooster. I call it talk more or talk less. And let me speak to the sage a little bit, because Mozi is not one of those names that is well known in the West. So Mozi is the name, and Mozi is how it seems to sound when phonetically transliterated. So Mozi was an ancient philosopher who lived about 2,400 years ago. So there was some time between his time on Earth and the time of Lao Tzu. He came after Lao Tzu. He taught among many other subjects, many topics, many things, but some of the significant ideas that he conveyed was about equality, was about meritocracy. So he taught the essential equality of all human beings. So in that respect, if you think about this, 2,400 years ago, he was actually greatly ahead of the curve. He taught universal love, a theme that would be repeated in similar fashion by the Buddha in India, the Indian prince, and several hundred years later in the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. So then, reflecting upon the metaphor in this story, the frogs and the rooster, we know that Mozi was certainly, like Lao Tzu, not advocating silence. You know, they both are students of the Tao. Rather, what they're both saying, especially Mozi with this story, what he's saying is that you want to speak up appropriately and effectively. If you are speaking the right things at the right time, you cannot help but be effective like the rooster. Thus, like everything else, there is a season for everything. There is a time to speak up, and there is a time to quiet down. How do you know when to speak up, when to stay quiet? Well, that's part of the work that we're all engaged in, knowing one from the other. Time to speak, time to not speak. That is part of the art of living in the Tao. Now, Mozi was not the only sage who studied the Tao to have commented on this particular issue. There's more. Previously, in previous meetings, I talked about how actually very often Confucius had thoughts and ideas that were drawn from the Tao tradition that are expressed exactly as a Tao sage would, so that Confucius was actually a student of the Tao and could be seen as a sage as well. So I want to highlight that for your attention. So instead of Mozi, I'll talk about Kongzi. Kongzi is the Chinese name for Confucius, either Kongzi or Kongfuzi. So he expressed about this particular topic as well. He expressed the following thoughts, and this gets into longer passages from the Annotated. So I'm just going to go straight to the translation, so you get the meaning, you get the gist of it, and not be lost in the character by character translations. So here's what he said. 可与言而不与之言，失人. What that means is if you should say something, if you know you should say something, but you don't say it, well, you've wronged that person. Okay, so think about this. When you are with someone that you care about, a friend, family member, and you know that there's something they really ought to be aware of. Maybe there's a fault that they have that they don't see. Maybe there's something going on that they don't know about. Well, you have this moral obligation to tell your friends the truth. You should not be glossing over or skipping over the details. You have to be honest. You have to tell the truth, the whole truth. No half measures, nothing misleading. You have to be forthright, transparent. So that's one part of it. Then, 孔子 says, 不可与言而与之言，失言. This is the flip side, everybody. If you should not say something but say it, you've spoken wrongly. This could be something that you say that is offensive to somebody else, or this could be something that is disingenuous, inauthentic, not true. You should not say it, but then you say it. Well, you've spoken wrongly. So this reflects negatively on you as well. So what Kongzi is saying is that there's a couple of ways that you can go wrong here. When you should say something but you don't say it, that's wrong. When you shouldn't say something but you say it anyway, that's also wrong. So then the conclusion from Kongzi. 知者不知人，亦不知信。亦不知言, pardon me, 知者不知人, 亦不知言. So those who know, or the wise person, as I explained, the dual interpretation of that, the wise person refrains from wrongness, whether it's to wrong someone, wrong actions, or to say the wrong thing, wrongness in words, wrongness in actions. And this corresponds to what we're talking about. Those who know do not talk. Those who talk do not know. So there's a nice reflection in Confucian teachings as well. Let's continue on. We are now on line 3. Line 3 and 4, close the door, close the mouth, shut the doors. Now, if you had been following these talks before, you may recall that we've seen this. This is these two lines may seem familiar if you have studied the Daodejing before. Indeed, the familiarity is coming from the fact that these are the exact same two lines that appeared in Daodejing 52. The two lines are the same, and the meaning remains the same as well. So let's, I want to show everybody a comparison between the two, but first, let me make sure we cover the meaning. First, I want to draw your attention to the last character in the third line. This character in ancient times meant portal, like an opening. In this context, when utilized this way, it's talking about the opening as in your mouth. It's an opening that potentially has the ability to express lies and distortions. So that's negativity going out. It is also a portal, an opening that potentially can let in unhealthy food and drinks like overconsumption, overindulgence. Perhaps something that's addictive like alcohol. So then the portal is something that it would benefit all of us to watch carefully, to monitor, and to close whenever possible. And when you close the mouth often, you naturally are speaking less and less. Thus, to close the portal is to watch one's communication. So that's the primary part of it, because we just got two lines that talk about those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know. So we know that this line is mostly talking about communication rather than consumption. So then let's also go to men. This is the last character in line 4. It means the doors. Just as the portal meant the mouth, the doors are referring to the eyes and ears. And that's because these are gateways that can lead to temptations and distractions, same as their meaning from before. So for you to shut the doors, that just means you want to block off the temptations and distractions. The temptations and distractions through the eyes and ears, that's also a two-way street. To close the mouth and the door, these are ways to help us live in a more peaceful, healthy, and harmonious way. So in the first bullet point here, I'm saying that these are the same two lines that appeared in Daodejing 52. So let me go ahead and lay them out side by side for you so you can see for yourself. So you can see, in fact, that the lines are identical and the translation is also identical. To illustrate this, I like to use this image here of the 3 frogs, and these match what the lines talk about. Whereas the first line, close the mouth, this matches the frog on the right, to close the mouth. And then the second line, shut the doors, matches the 2 frogs, the one on the left and the one in the middle. So let me spend a moment on how this is a little bit different between East and West. In Eastern traditions, and here I'm talking about the Tao philosophy, Buddhist teachings, in Eastern traditions, it is a common teaching that the external reflects the internal. Your external reality will reflect your internal mental landscape, mental and spiritual landscape. Therefore, if you don't dwell on evil thoughts, you will naturally see, hear, and speak only the good. When we have the three frogs like this, we might say, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. The Western concept is a little bit different. It's subtly different. It may be not about reflecting the goodness within your hearts externally, but rather something that is that's a little darker. Like, see no evil could mean that you look the other way, that you ignore something bad that's going on. To hear no evil could be that you pretend ignorance, like, what was that? I didn't hear it. I didn't hear anything. And therefore, avoid or deny any moral responsibility. And thus, you don't have to talk about it. Speak no evil, but not because it's out of the goodness of your hearts, the positive impulse, but that you want to avoid responsibility. Now, the same ideas can be represented in different ways. Instead of the three frogs, it could be the four monkeys. Sometimes the monkeys also show up in three, and sometimes the frogs show up in four. But there's additional ways to highlight this particular concept. Here in this slide, I have the four monkeys. Sometimes they're called the four wise monkeys. And here again, I want to share with everyone that this is something that Confucius, has talked about as well. He actually talks about it as a group of four, and therefore corresponding exactly with the four monkeys. So let me bring Kongzi back in again and talk about what he talks about. On this topic, Confucius expressed the following thoughts. 非礼勿视. This is the eyes. This is basically saying, do not look at that which is improper. Example, if there's something that is meant to be private, that you should not be exposed to, that you should not be seeing, something that is confidential, it would not be proper for you to look at it. A Tao cultivator would take that seriously and then would make a conscious decision to not look at something that can be tempting or distracting. Then we have another aspect of it. 非礼勿听. This is the hearing part. Do not listen to that which is improper. This covers a lot of ground. For instance, as we go through life, we will sometimes hear flattery. People will praise us, sometimes for good reason, sometimes not. Either way, if it's something that can inflate the ego, something that can distort reality, then it would be better to not even listen to it, to pay no attention. Same with gossip and rumors. What good is it to listen to rumors and gossip, especially when it is likely to be untrue, fabricated, and just designed to spread misinformation, maybe part of a disinformation campaign? It would not be proper to listen to that. So this is the second one of the 4 teachings from Kongzi, he called it 四勿, the 4 don'ts. So the first don't is do not look at that which is improper. The second one is don't listen to that which is improper. Then how about the third? 非礼勿言. This is about the speaking part. This is the first monkey to the left. Do not speak of that which is improper. Well, we like to, this is where we want to point out that Tao cultivators put a lot of time and attention on making sure that this part of the cultivation is done properly, because there are so many opportunities for people to complain about just about anything, or to pass on critical remarks, untruths, conspiracy theories sometimes, things that are not proper for us to pass on. When we speak, what goes out is like a dagger that's been thrown. Once you throw that dagger, there's no taking it back. It can hurt someone, and that's why we have to be particularly careful. And in my case, I myself have also decided that it would be improper for me to curse. So I'm going to minimize or eliminate cursing for myself. That's the discipline that I impose on myself. I would prefer to say things that are positive, that are true, that are encouraging, that express humility. And that is my effort to cleanse this aspect of my communication. Lastly, the last don't, 非礼勿动. Do not act on that which is improper. And this is where the rightmost monkey in our picture has the hands folded in his lap to not take any action, to not take action that is improper, to not take things that don't belong to you, to not raise your hand in anger against someone else. This is the fourth of the 4 don'ts, the final one of the 4 don'ts. And Confucius, by all 4 of these, is also assuming that we have cultivated to a certain point where we actually know what is proper and improper. And much of the cultivational effort is devoted to that, is devoted to telling, understanding what is proper, what is not. So this corresponds once again to this particular chapter. And we see close the mouth, shut the doors. This is exactly what we're talking about here, the 4 don'ts. Let's continue on. There are many more fascinating concepts to talk about. This chapter is full of them. So line 5, blunt the sharpness. Well, this definitely requires some explanation. This is also something that we have seen before. Indeed, from line 5 all the way down to line 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, these 4 lines have appeared previously in the Daodejing. We will talk about where they appeared previously, what context they appeared in, slightly different, mostly the same. For now, though, I want to focus on this line and explain what it means. To blunt the sharpness. Does that mean that Tao cultivators are not allowed to keep a sharp blade? No, it's not anything to do with that. It has nothing to do with blunting one's weapon. Here, the sharpness is not referring to a physical blade. Rather, it is referring to personal interactions where you can be sharply critical of someone, that you can have harsh words in describing something, that you can take actions that can be hurtful to another person. So sharpness, there's actually a lot embedded in just that one character. It can also be sharpness in terms of when we say that someone is really sharp, that's a person who is highly intelligent, but then oftentimes that sharpness is closely associated with the harshness as well, and therefore it is entirely possible to have someone who is highly intelligent but also highly critical. And this is just like talking too much. It's another manifestation of the ego. This is something that Tao cultivators have to monitor, watch out for, this kind of harshness in themselves. So, bottom line, to blunt the sharpness is to be more harmonious, is to foster, promote more harmony. So that means no harsh words. Whatever you want to express, you can say it gently. Make no attempts to embarrass someone else. That would be making people uncomfortable. Tao cultivators would refrain from doing that. And they would indeed always provide others a graceful way out. So even when you are discussing with someone and the other person is clearly wrong, rather than to press the issue, make it seen in public, embarrass the other person, a Tao cultivator would prefer to not make a whole lot of noise about it, allow the other person a graceful exit. Okay, so that is the first of the two. Let's talk about line 6. Line 6 says, unravel the knots. That, just like line 5, is not meant to be literal. Line 5 is not referring to weapons like blades that are sharp. Line 6, at first glance, might be seen as referring to a physical rope that's tied up in knots, but it isn't that at all. Knots, in this case, represent complexities in life. Complexities that can be contentious, entangling, that can be, well, complex. So whenever we have contentious entanglements, even litigations, lawsuits, these are all knots that must be untied from the Tao perspective. So Tao cultivators will seek to unravel the knots by cutting to the chase, simplifying matters. So how do they do that? In the past, when I talk about this, I say, well, to simplify complexity, you have to let go of clutter, and you have to do that physically. You have to look at clutter in your environment and discard them or donate them. You have to look at clutter in your mental landscape, look at emotional baggage, look at things that you learned before that must be unlearned because they no longer serve you. Then you can begin to simplify your life. Well, there's more to it than that. There's more to it than what I talked about before. There's also the complexities in life that lead to annoyance, negative emotions, and the way to simplify those is to hold on to the one meaning the unity or the oneness of Tao principles, and also hold on to one's original purpose, to the original purpose that you had when you initiated something, when you did something, that if you were to hold on to that, it makes everything so much more simple. It makes everything so much simpler. So there's a lot to unpack here, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to pause on this slide. In our next meeting in 2 weeks, we're going to return to this slide, backtrack a little bit, rewind a little bit, explain that we need to spend more time to talk about simplifying the complexities of life through Tao principles, as well as your original purpose, to keep that in mind. Very important topic. For now, we should be looking ahead to the summary to summarize the time that we have spent together today. So in the Tao, it's all about applying the Tao teachings from the Daodejing to life. So I want to get into the takeaways from Daodejing chapter 56. So this will be part 1, because we'll most likely have a part 2, possibly even a part 3. In this particular chapter, we began with a couple of lines that speak to how best to live in the Tao, what Tao cultivators would do to live in accordance with the Tao. As you can see on the right-hand side, I have the first 2 lines from this particular chapter, talking about those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know, and as I mentioned, those who know can be interpreted separately as those who possess wisdom. So let me bring that up first. First idea is self-discipline, and here I must emphasize the freedom of the Tao is not a license to do whatever the winds dictate. In the West in particular, there's a huge amount of misconception. People think this exactly, that, well, I follow the Tao, so I'm just going to flow like water and do whatever the heck I please. That's not the authentic teaching. That's not the original Tao, not by a long shot. There are so many videos and web pages devoted to that. Unfortunately, they're all distortions of the original teachings. People don't really know what the original Daodejing actually says, and that's why it's important for me to make this point. You have to use the self-discipline to regulate yourself. The greatest cultivators of the Tao impose disciplines on themselves. And the other part is wisdom, 智慧. So 知者 can also be pronounced 智者, and that's where it is a reference to the wise person, the person who has wisdom, sufficient wisdom to know that you don't need to talk all the time. So that's the first part of it. And I also want to emphasize that talking less for them, for these people who are wise, it's actually a very natural thing. This is because the more you understand, the less you feel the need to tell everyone what you know. Indeed, you may look back upon yourself to the beginning of your cultivation, when you were still a spiritual novice, excitedly telling everybody about what you were planning to do. When you attain a certain level of spiritual maturity, you realize that's really not that. It's not that important. It's not that necessary to tell everybody. It's more important that you carry out the actions and that you do it for yourself. Lastly, your knowledge of this, especially the second line there, 言者不知, those who talk do not know or do not possess wisdom. Those who speak are not wise. This is something that gives you insight into human nature. But the bottom line is that those people who have trouble quieting down, they've got issues. They've got deeper issues, and they have a lot more to work on in themselves. You want to avoid being someone like that. If you detect the same tendency in yourself, you want to start thinking about ways to move in a different direction. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.